Hello and warm welcome to Hospitality Talks. Abid and I, we are really excited to welcome you to a very interesting segment of Hospitality Talks, our third Hospitality Talks here on LinkedIn Live. I'd like to first of all thank all the live viewers and also the replay viewers who are watching this later on. So since we have a very distinguished panel with us today, I would really appreciate if you give some social currency with 5 thumbs up or 5 hearts to each participant, and that will help us to be seen by as many people as possible, and LinkedIn Live will notice that we are live. And also, if you, for any questions that you have for the latter part when we have a Q&A, put in the comments capital Q and then the question. And finally, we'd like to know where you are watching from. So just say hello and just indicate the city where you are watching from. So that would be great. So we can see that we have a very global audience. I understand that the post that we put out has reached about 5,000 viewers who has reacted positively. So it looks like we have a good crowd joining us for the show. So with that, then I would like to then hand over to Abid.
Well, thank you, Sam, and thank you to our esteemed guests that have joined us. We really appreciate the time. Since Sam and I started these conversations a few months ago, even as late as our last session in March, our world is very different today. COVID-19 has truly created a moment of truth for all of us, all nations, all governments, all organizations and individuals. Our hearts go out to everyone that has been impacted as a result, and a huge shout out to first responders and medical professionals and people that are working in grocery stores and delivery people, everybody that is helping all of us out and keeping us safe. At this time, I guess we are all asking if our choices and actions reflect our purpose and value, and how these choices and actions define us. We need to rely on integrity, agility, innovation, people centricity to get through this time. Typically, during emergencies, humanities have come together physically through vigils and a lot of the other things in providing comfort to each other. Unfortunately, in this pandemic, that is certainly not possible. So we are having to do things differently. There might be new social norms at the end of all this. So in these times, we not only have to navigate through the current, we have to plan for the recovery and, of course, shape the future as to what it would look like. As I said, we've put together a fantastic panel of guests to help us discuss these topics. And to start out, I would like to welcome Dr. Erin Tucker, who is with Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Erin, thank you for joining us. How's your day been?
Everything's been well. Thank you so much for having me. Tell you the weather's great here in DC today, and spring is here. So definitely grateful for having me today.
Superb. Well, look, we all know the current circumstances. We all know what the world is going through. Could you help us understand, because you obviously dealing with the future leaders in the hospitality industry, their development programs. Could you help us understand what sort of questions they have brought up and what kind of things are you fielding today?
Absolutely. I mean, students right now, they obviously have an immediate concern about their job offers. Some of them have been extended job offers, and some of those offers have been reneged. Some of them are going into the job the job hunting space. So they're definitely worried a little bit about what's happening. What I'm seeing now, though, is that that both the industry and practitioners, as well as the academy, are really stepping up to start having these conversations about really being able to help students really articulate their skills. One of the things about the hospitality industry, and especially hospitality education, is that these skills are transferable in so many different industry sectors. So with that, students really being able to translate that their skills can be used in so many different areas. A lot of times they don't think about areas like food distribution. They don't think about banking industry. They don't think about even companies, specific companies that have a variety of large supply chain elements. Supply chain's not going anywhere. Everything is continuously moving. But getting them to think about those avenues is what's really important. So that's what, that's kind of what they're looking for. That's what they're asking for with that. And really the industry has to also keep, students interested as well. So, with that, the industry has to really begin to kind of broaden its lens to be much more inclusive of different students' backgrounds, as well as not necessarily having students that reflect their individual interests, but being much more inclusive of students that can problem solve. So in asking behavior-based questions, really being able to listen and to be able to say, this might not have been the way I would have gone about doing it, but maybe this particular perspective is something that's needed now.
Well, thank you for that. I hope your students that have the passion for this industry will stay with the industry. Our industry can be a bit volatile, but having said that, as we all know, at the worst time in financial crisis, travel and tourism still grew double digits. This really contributes a great deal to a lot of nations, a lot of governments. So I hope that if they have the passion for this, that they will stay with the industry, and industry together will evolve after this pandemic. Stronger, more vibrant, things might have changed, and that's what we'll talk about, what the industry would look like. Any thoughts on how you think the industry would evolve after the pandemic?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the industry will evolve a couple ways. I think that the first avenue is that the industry will look to, I think, technology a lot more. I think that there was always been a discussion of technology, but I think that now there's going to be a specific viewpoint with looking at how technology is being incorporated in really business continuity. I think that there's always been a discussion of how do we incorporate technology in what we do, but the question is really going to be about business continuity. So what technologies can we put into place in order to make sure that our businesses continue to move as something as any sort of activity happens, and of course that's with the pandemic being one of them. I think embracing technology in the areas of cybersecurity and the protection of information, data breaches. I think that this is something that's been a little bit more reactive. I think that now there's going to be much more of a focus on the proactive avenue with that. Other industries are light ahead of sometimes within our hospitality industry. So I think just catching up and being able to have both a mindset around this, but also investing in this. And I think that the industry, I'm really hoping that the industry will return back to an understanding of the hospitality and training our employees and management in hospitality, which is the welcoming of the guests, the understanding of different cultures, which is a tad bit separate than tourism, which is the business of movement and travel. I think that we spend a lot of time on the tourism side, but really being able to also articulate that ability to really go back to the heart of hospitality in our discussions and translating that into the workforce.
Oh, that's fantastic. And particularly at this time, quite candidly, when there are a lot of people that are out of what they have normally done, it behooves us to really think it through as to what values are important to each of us and how we will go moving forward. Sam?
Well, I think you are raising such an important point. I'm also interested to know how the students these days are reacting to the situation, because now the schools are closed, and what are they looking at in terms of continuous learning? Is that going to be the online learning and so on? If you could like to share your views on this.
Right. Well, the Academy in Education has definitely taken a very swift approach to, once again, going back to the concept of business continuity. We call it instructional continuity. And so instructional continuity really isn't just anymore about online education versus on ground. It's more about online education versus the remote classroom. Online education has a completely different modality. A completely different student that is in an online setting. There's terms called synchronous and asynchronous learning, where in an online environment, that is something that is actually produced prior to the course beginning. The course semester and time frame is much shorter. Students have some level of interaction that has already been previously recorded prior to. Some online classes don't meet in person or synchronously at all. There's different times that are allocated for the professor. That's very different than what we're experiencing right now, which is a remote classroom. And so people are using this term like we're moving classes online. We're not moving them online, we're moving them into a remote environment. And this poses a new learning for instructors who are teaching live, synchronous, as we would call it. They have to now have a new skill set in understanding how to keep students engaged when you're in a remote learning classroom, not just online. So understanding tools and techniques, simulations, polling, those avenues, being able to show video at the same time, the opportunity of bringing in now guest speakers from all over the world. You can do that now when you're in a remote. Not to say you couldn't do it in an on-ground class, but that ability to be able to be so much more inclusive and bringing in the world is very, very important. But this is a new skill that instructors have to learn. There's also the skill that students have to learn with being in a remote classroom. And some students, students who take on-ground classes, they want to be in an environment. They want to leave their work and actually go into a classroom. They actually they look at the university and the classroom as a tool to be able to say, I'm taking 2 hours of my day and of my time to focus on an area that I'm really interested in. Now we're going to have to do that's going to always still continue, but now we're going to have to take that remote classroom and recreate the simulation for them to still use this as a tool of escape. So training and really giving tools and tips to our students are a big thing. Such as just changing your background, making sure that you hopefully are in an area where you can have that focus. I know there's a lot of fun video that is out there, showing, the background and you're living in home environments. But the reality is that to re-simulate that focused environment, we're going to have to, as instructors, really teach our students about that. How do you recreate that? Now you're going to be doing video, your interviews using video. You're going to have to do your corporate professional presentations from your home. So giving them a new tool set for that really is a great experience. And then, of course, in education, a lot of people don't understand that if it was not without the staff or administrators, they run everything that a university or school has. You don't see them, you don't hear from them much, but they are really a backbone of the continuation of the school. So having staff and administrators to really learn new policies in this new remote environment really, once again, just creates such a different approach that is welcomed.
Yeah, thank you. Abid?
It's very interesting that you bring up. All of us have had to adjust. All of us are having to learn new ways of doing things. In some ways, while we are all practicing social distance, But I think in technology in these times might have brought us together in other ways that we might not have thought of in the past. So it is definitely changing a lot of things, what we have done in the past and what we used to. And for that matter, there might be some new social norms that would come out at the end of this pandemic. Hopefully this chapter would be behind us before too long, but there will be new things that will come out as a result. So, Erin, last question. If you were to write a case study as to what has happened with this pandemic, how did the hospitality industry dealt with it? What can we do? How can the industry contribute the recovery process? What would that look like?
Oh, wow. I would, great question. I would write two separate case studies. I think the first one would be, I would call it something like Mayday, ethical decision making in a time of crisis. In a time of crisis where there is not a handbook or a tool book on how to approach decision making, I think that the ethical dilemmas that are being exposed right now is a huge avenue and area that I think that would cause that will really create a really good case study. Whether it's right now with the cruise industry, that's why I kind of called it kind of the Mayday, and you have a dilemma. I teach ethics and hospitality at Georgetown, so I create these simulated, scenarios. And one of them was kind of that. It's a classic case of you have 10 people, but only 9 spaces on a boat. Who does not make it? And that's something in which, it sounds kind of morbid, but you give these very, very simple descriptions of these 10 people. And the decision-making process is how are you going about determining what is important and what's of value and who's the value. And now we're actually in that space. This is, I always say to them, this is something that people in the healthcare industry have to grapple with on a daily basis. We're there now. So when you mention about new norms, really allowing for students to have a level of ethical decision making and ethical approach to how they will make make decisions is exceptionally important. And then the second case, I think going back once again to the new norms would be grief strategies for the overworked hospitality professional. I think that now we're in a space right now where grief is what we're dealing with. And we will come back. This industry, it's not even coming. It's not so much as that it's not gone. It's transforming, and it will be back to a different look. But the reality is that employees now have a very strong sense of what it is they deem important. So creating maybe a case around mental and emotional health or emotional labor. What's the employer's responsibility for employee wellness? Because there's going to be a level of grief that students that industry professionals are really going to have to deal with and cope with for many years to come. So with that, maybe writing a case on how you would approach that, both from an HR perspective, but also from a compassion perspective.
Well, thank you for that. And truly, I think none of us are brought up recognizing how to deal with the grief side of it. You're absolutely correct. Our healthcare professionals are in the right dead center in the middle of it. They're dealing with some very, very hard calls day in and day out. But I think the particularly from organizations' point of view and individuals, the true north would be defined as we work through this pandemic. So thank you for that insight. Greatly appreciate it. Please stay around and we will come back with some more questions at the tail end of it. Thank you, Dr. Tucker. Let me move to our next guest, Alex Cabanas, who's with Benchmark Global Hospitality. Alex, how's your day been, and how has your day started out this morning?
Hey, Abid, thanks for having us. And Dr. Tucker, I'm going to come hang out in your class and help you with everything you just talked about, because very inspiring to think about what the students in this world are learning before they jump into our industry. So great way to start it. And Abid, good to see you, old friend. Abid used to work for our company a while ago, and we've always been keeping in touch, so appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time. I know that the people's time is being consumed in many different ways. We were used to having in-person meetings, and all of a sudden.
Yeah, well, we're looking forward to social distancing being a distant memory in our industry for sure.
Yeah. So, Alex, if I may ask you, tell us some of the success stories from Benchmark point of view. Though we are far from celebrating successes at this point, but what has Benchmark done to address the various stakeholders in this industry?
Well, look, it's been everything that our economy and our world is doing right now, unfortunately, is the opposite of what hospitality is really all about. Social distancing. It's impossible to do our business in this state of affairs. So we are the exact opposite. So our industry overall is at the front line of the unfortunate negative impact to an industry that really can't function in this environment. And I would include cruise lines and hotel industry, obviously, food and beverage and restaurants. So, we went through, a normal course of 2 weeks of crisis, which was just how do we manage the employee scenario? How do we manage each of our properties? There was certainly early health, safety, and concerns for our guests. Fortunately, across our portfolio of about 12,000 guest rooms, 60-odd properties, and a business in the UK in the meetings and event space, we've had very few COVID-19 cases, so we're very fortunate. I will tell you that health professionals that we worked with in various jurisdictions in each of those cases did a phenomenal job. So I applaud everybody who's having to deal with the frontline reality of this right now. And then really all of our properties that have ownership, they have investors behind them. We have to protect the business. So we've had to make the very unfortunate decisions that are heartbreaking, the toughest in our careers, of furloughing. Essentially, in most cases, we furloughed employees to where they're able to apply for unemployment. We're able to keep them on health care and benefits, but they're essentially receiving no pay because we have no revenue. Across our portfolio, 2/3 to 75% of our properties at this point are suspended operations. Those that remain open have a skeleton crew and may just simply be in a jurisdiction where it makes some sense, or there's enough other business, and we're still talking 10 to 15% occupancy. So when you really consider the impact to our industry, and you look back to 9/11 or to any one of the other pandemics that has happened in the past, the impact in the last month has been really combined more so than either of those instances. And there's just no way to solve for 80 to 90% decline in revenue in a quarter. I mean, no business can really manage through that. We're very fortunate to be in a position where, at this point, we've got great investors and a great team. I'm very fortunate to have an incredible team. We had record year of success for our company last year, and we celebrated that record success about 6 weeks ago, and then are now in this environment. So fortunate to have a team that managed through a very challenging environment very, very well. And we've really accepted the fact that we can't control this reality. We have to react the right way. So taking care of our employees, being transparent, taking care of our guests. Biggest thing for us has been flexibility for our guests. I've had a number of interactions with some of our guests, and it's just assuring them, giving them flexibility, particularly on the group side, and rebooking business into the future. And then really over communicating with our ownership groups that we work with that own these properties because they're really trying to protect the asset for the long term. So our short-term thinking, unfortunately, is crisis management. But really, right about this week, next week, we're starting to focus on what's the reboot. What does it look like to reopen all these assets and come back? It's very hard right now to see what that reality looks like timing-wise, but that's our focus right now is let's be ready, let's be proactive, let's be ahead of the game and be ready when all these things come back to some sense of normalcy.
I think the bounce back or reboot, as you put it, is going to be one of a kind in itself, though this pandemic threw a major loop, and there isn't an industry that is immune to it. Certainly, hospitality, generally speaking, is sort of the canary in the coal mine most of the times, but hospitality is known for bringing people together. This pandemic is counterintuitive. It's asking
Exactly.
asking us to stay away, but it is a matter of time that this will come back, and I think the soonest we can get a handle on the virus itself, listening to the scientists and people that are spending their 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and trying to get hold of it, I think our industry will come back, and it'll come back in a vengeance. But at the same time, reboot of 16,000 rooms in 50 different locations, you're going to be going through almost opening up 50 hotels all in one go. What can you do to be prepared for that?
Well, we're very fortunate to have had good, solid teams in place. So a big part of the reason that all my industry colleagues are doing the same of furloughing employees is you've got a trained workforce. We've got a team that knows what to do. And so bringing them back online and bringing that team back in a staged way, at this point, impossible for us to know just how quickly the business will ramp up. It's not going to go as quick as it came down, but our assumption is that it will be a V-shaped recovery. So bringing back that team in staged ways will be very helpful. We clearly are concerned about supply chain. So we've got a team focused on simply that, right? How do we think about supply chain going into the ramp up of opening? Because a lot of the supply chains for our industry have been shut down. Obviously, a tremendous amount of supply comes from China and other areas that are going to be affected worldwide. And honestly, I don't think anybody really knows the answer. Much of what we did through this crisis was put a plan in place, and every 24 hours we adjust. I think it's going to be very much the same as we come out, is we're going to have a very flexible and adjustable plan. One of the things that we're really focused on right now as well is really communication to our clients and giving them assurances that we will be ready when it's time. And when that, I keep calling it the all clear message. At some point there needs to be a scientific, data-driven all clear message, so we can really get back to the business of life and meetings and business travel and vacations and all the other things that unfortunately we're putting on pause right now.
I think coming out of it, one of the other challenges that we need to collectively talk about is how to gain consumer confidence, because everybody is going to be a bit jittery, particularly international travel, where it was relied upon, particularly the major markets like New York, Tokyo, Singapore, Hong Kong, Madrid. Everybody relied on a lot of international inbound. That what people are going to be jittery. So we will have to make sure that collectively we are prepared with a cohesive, concise message to gain consumer confidence in the shortest time period so that they will come back. But thank you for that insight. Sam?
Yeah, I think from what I'm hearing here in Northern Europe, there are a lot of people now already thinking what is sort of the next, because they are so anxious to find a time to go to the holiday. So they're already kind of thinking along the lines, the future. And so there's a little bit of a mindset, even though it's very dramatic and so on, but also the importance for brands and companies, how they communicate about that. So it's not the kind of a cliche type of message about welcome back to have your greatest holiday, but find a very maybe a humble and empathetic approach to reach the customer in a way that they remember that particular destination, the hotel, whenever they are ready to make that step to make that booking. But there definitely is in the back of the mind, people are already. I mean, we are looking about 3 weeks here in Finland. That and I am already hearing that there's a kind of I think I need to start a plan somehow to go somewhere, because now I'm sure this will be over sooner than later.
Yeah, Sam, our message has really been about social togetherness. Even in my letter to our entire I've sent two letters to our entire employee group in the last 3 weeks, just giving them a transparent and realistic appreciation for what is going on within the company, and also spreading as much hope that we will get through this. It's not a matter of if, it's just when. And when is hard. It's impatient. It's challenging to just not know. But what we can all know is our company will come out the other side of this. It's really when and exactly how. And we will do that well. But social togetherness has been a big part of it. Be the difference are the three most important words in my company. And it's all about the difference we make in the lives of those we serve and all the constituents with which we serve. So my message to the team has been, in the darkest of moments, in the moments of frustration, in the moments where, unfortunately, a lot of our employees are going to be suffering financially, and we're doing everything we possibly can to provide the unemployment resources, provide health benefits. I mean, we're really providing that guidance to our employees on that issue. But really close your eyes and imagine the day when social togetherness is back in season and back in vogue, and social distancing is a distant memory, because the healthcare workers and the pharmacists and the grocers, they're at the front line of the crisis now. And when this is over, hospitality and travel will be at the forefront of the recovery. The world will need hospitality. The world will need togetherness. The world will need face-to-face handshakes and hugs and all the things that we're not doing. It's in us as a human race. Mm-hmm. We need it, and hospitality will be right there at the forefront of that. So, as hard as it is right now because we're shut down, there's going to be a moment in time where we are at the front line of recovery, and what a great opportunity for our business when that does take place.
Thank you. Those are very great words of wisdom from you. Thank you.
Alex, any thoughts as to what the industry would look like post-pandemic era?
So I refuse to believe, and I will, die on my sword, that face-to-face meetings and conferences and events of this nature are going to fundamentally change long-term. Yes, will there be potentially more use of technology? But that's been a trend for a long time. I still think people will want to gather in small and large groups. I think in the medium term, there will definitely be a focus on more regional, local. We've certainly targeted a lot of our research and development on the sales and marketing side in each of our properties. Let's look at our database. Let's look at who comes to each of our properties, and let's understand the dynamics of travel as we come out of this, because odds are there's going to be a certain level of comfort with staying local, meeting in smaller groups. I think that's just human nature. Hopeful that the all clear at some point in time builds the psychological safety that we really need for people to say, okay, I'm going to go back to the life I had before and the way I interact with other humans, just as if there was any other respiratory virus, in the air at any given time, just like flu season. I'm not a scientist. I don't know when that all clear is there, but I'm certainly hopeful, and it will be great for the world. Obviously, I think there'll be some expectation of cleanliness standards and things of that nature that will be expected. We're spending some time as a company around the cross-functional staffing and doing more with less. What can we learn about staffing levels, technology use, how the consumer behavior may shift in our space. So, aside from cleanliness, more just what are consumers going to be more used to, perhaps, at the end of this? I think that's still yet to be seen or yet to be known. And then, Abid, you had asked about alternative accommodations, like Airbnb and rentals and things of that nature. I think that business isn't going anywhere. Be very curious to see just how, because as a member of the hospitality space, we've always been focused on the health and safety of our guests, and there's obviously a tremendous amount of regulation associated with that. And that's been an unregulated area of the alternative accommodation space. I got to imagine that space is going to change dramatically as a result of this, because people simply may not feel as safe if they're going to a place that doesn't have the same cleanliness standards and the same level of expectations commercially, as a hotel, does.
So you're thank you for bringing that point up. You're spot on. I think there are consumer for each type of lodging that is offered and that exists. Alternative accommodations, thus far, in spite of the fact that there is a lot of work that is being done on a regulatory side of things to make sure that it levels the playing field and make sure that the consumers are safe. I think this might force the issue, not that it's going to go away, but it might force certain operating standards that alternative accommodations will have to adhere by, again, to gain the confidence of the consumer so that they will feel comfortable going and using their preferred choice of accommodations, whatever that happens to be, whichever environment they might feel comfortable with. Any particular initiatives, Alex, that you guys might have launched as you deal with this pandemic today or preparing for the reboot side of it?
Two things that have one's a feel-good element of this. We have a philanthropic initiative across our portfolio called Hometown Hospitality. At every property, it's how do we engage in the local community? How do we support anything that is relevant to our employee base? And that can be anything from food banks to homeless shelters to involved with school programs. It's a wide variety. It's not something that we dictate nationally as an organization. It's something that we want our properties to do locally. Well, we've turned that into home team hospitality for the past few weeks and the coming months going forward, and really taking care of our own. We obviously have a tremendous employee base that is going to suffer through this. And so we've just turned that on its head and called it home team hospitality, and finding out what community resources are available in all the locations that we're in that can be available to our staff. What can we do internally with relief fund efforts that we've already started to be able to help make ends meet? All of our properties went through freezer cleans and food baskets to all of our team. We've even had, I think, some chefs doing cooking classes online for our teammates. I heard last week that somebody did a 75-person Zoom call with their entire property base. So a lot of just connectivity with our employees to Dr. Tucker's point. How are we emotionally connecting with everybody? I've told every member of our team that everyone is a part of the solution here to get our company through this. Everybody is a part of the process. And although some are going to be on the front lines of managing the crisis and still working full time, and some are going to be furloughed, much like we're all being asked to stay home today, some people on our team are just going to be asked to stay home for 4 months because there's just not enough business level, but they're still part of our family. So we're really engaging and communicating with them as much as possible. And really the second big one, Abid, is the CARES Act, a tremendous government resource available to us. I've never been one for a tremendous amount of government support, but in this time, it's absolutely the right thing to do. I am super thankful for our government for doing what they've done, and so we're helping our owners and helping our properties we've had an entire team of people digging through a whole lot of information being shared so that we can be proactive and focused in leveraging that resource as much as we can to save jobs and bring liquidity to our business to be able to get us through this next 3 or 4 months.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm sure your associates and all stakeholders appreciate all that you're doing, because a simple thing for a person that has been furloughed trying to apply for the unemployment has become an arduous task. Yeah. There has never been, or at least in the recent history, there never have been numbers that are as staggering. Our systems are being taxed to the max, and talk about a stress test on all infrastructure that is being placed as a result of the environment that we're operating in. So I'm sure your stakeholders appreciate all that you're doing. Last question, Alex, and then we'll move on. Dr. Tucker had mentioned earlier about industry evolving to attract and look after the new entrants, the new leaders of the industry. Any particular thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I'm sure this will be seen by, some students in our industry and people who are thinking about hospitality. Well, I say to everybody, if you aren't tuned into the radio station WIFO, then you're not made for our space, and that's what's in it for others. You have to be other-centered, and much like those at the front line of dealing with the healthcare crisis, I go back to, we are going to be at the front line of dealing with healing the world with hospitality. And although there's a pause for right now, what an awesome time to join our industry, because we will come roaring back and there will be tremendous opportunity. And I don't think experience making, memory making, valuing experiences over things, which is already happening. And I think this will only further that interest generationally. It's a great space to be in, and we're at the forefront of memory making and emotion as our product. So we look forward to welcoming a lot of new people in the industry. Just give us a little time during this pause, but we'll be ready for them.
Well, thank you very much, Alex. And there are maybe a handful of people in this world, and yesterday one of the news anchors was highlighting World War II veteran that has just celebrated his 104th or 105th birthday. About the only person that we know of that went through Spanish flu pandemic and is going through this time. Whether we wanted to experience this pandemic or not, we're in the thick of it. And hopefully we will never have to go through this again. But we will learn how to deal with these kind of adverse situations as they come up. I thought industry had dealt with the other issues like SARS or H1N1, but they were nowhere near as big and widespread as this was. Thank you very much, Alex. So let me turn over to Michael. Michael, how's your day going? Thank you for joining us.
So far, so good. It's been great to listen to the commentary so far. Good morning from Greater Metro New York. We are hanging in there, fighting through.
I guess you are in the hotspot in U.S. The tri-state area has become sort of a place which is absolutely overrun, and people are trying to learn from the tri-state response.
We are, and we're sticking close to hearth and home, obviously, all of us. But I have to say, it's been wonderful and gratifying to see communities, neighborhoods, neighbors, families come together in this time, communicate with each other. Holiday season coming up, Easter, Passover. It's going to be a virtual holiday season for all of us, but we'll be together nonetheless, and that spirit's carrying through here in the New York area as well.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Michael, if I may ask you, communication is important in any organization at any time, even during normal operation. Communication is pivotal, and there is possibly no silver bullet as to what's the best way to communicate, because it's all about the audience and who you're trying to reach. What can the industry and practitioners do today to stay connected with all stakeholders? And in that stakeholder, I talk about the associates, I talk about the guests, and I talk about the owners whose investments are being looked after. All of us are in it together, but any thoughts on what can we do to dial that up and make sure that we are staying connected with all stakeholders?
Yeah, I think that's right, Abid. And, as a communications practitioner, I tend to think about this in two segments, right? There's speaking and communicating and proactively communicating. But before that, it really comes down to listening and connecting. So for me, connecting and listening to your audiences, your guests, your customers, your investors, your associates is really the first step. I was reading the other day about a company outside of hospitality, but it's called Gravity, which is a payments processing company for small businesses out of Seattle, confronted with many of the same challenges that Alex has outlined and that are afflicting hotel companies right now. Layoffs, no cash coming in the door. And the CEO of this company actually created a forum whereby they met with the entire company, sat them down, asked them to assess the situation together with leadership, so 200 employees, and then scheduled 40 individual sessions with small groups to listen to them, hear the challenges they're confronting at this time, and then asked each employee in a confidential communication to offer what they can provide at this time, what kind of sacrifice can they make in order to help the company survive. So Gravity was looking at, based on millions of dollars in lost revenue from small business, their small business clients, a 2-month window of being able to survive. As a result of the communications with their employees and voluntary sacrifices their employees made, they raised enough money to open that window to 8 to 12 months. So for me, I think what that shows is it begins with listening. It begins with listening to your associates and your stakeholders, hearing what they're feeling and what's on their mind, and then trying to use that feedback in order to create your policies and your chart a path to the future. So if listening and connecting is point one, I would say step two is articulating and proactively communicating. If there's an opportunity in this moment for hotel companies, practitioners, vendors to the industry, it's the opportunity to step back and really find your voice. There's a ton of clutter, as you no doubt see in the industry right now. Most of it is appropriate. It's very difficult to know exactly how to find the right thing to say, given the constellation of circumstances that Alex has outlined. I will say this, nobody's buying. So selling as a communication strategy is not the way to go for your company or your hotel at this time. Thinking about where your hotel or your company fits in this pandemic, how you're working with guests, associates, and stakeholders to improve their situation and shine a light toward the future. It's a really important exercise to dig deep and try to find your authentic voice and think about exactly what your company stands for, what its mission is, and how you serve the industry. A brief case study there. We've all been through, unfortunately, downturns and crises in the past. Coming out of 9/11, we were working with a company probably many of your listeners know, Frenkel, and Tom Corcoran, a good friend of ours, who was the CEO. At the time, prior to 9/11, there was a merger announced between Frenkel and Maristar to create the number one largest REIT in the hotel industry. As a result of 9/11, that merger had to be canceled. And the question was, now what do we do? What do we say? The merger's off. We've been preparing the industry for this announcement and this culmination for 6 months, and now it's not happening. Where do we go? What do we say? After some intensive communication sessions and discussions, we found, among other things, that Tom was, and I believe still is, a gourmet chef. And the way he built esprit de corps among his staff and his team was to gather them every Friday. This predated 9/11, but to cook them breakfast in the office every Friday. We honed in on that, and as an example of the way in which Frenkel was reaching out to its team, its staff, its management, building esprit de corps, and sticking together during difficult times, highlighted that through a series of media outreach, and eventually ended up with Tom cooking breakfast on Breakfast with a CEO on CNBC, supported by and involving his entire corporate team. For Tom, that was his voice. That was his passion. He integrated that into a message about what his company was trying to do and how they were trying to support together, and saw it through a very difficult time with success. So listening, connecting, feedback, and authenticity, I think, are the keys to effective communication.
Oh, that's fantastic. Truly, the organizational culture and organizational mission and values are going to be front and center as we fight through and navigate through this pandemic. Again, as has been said several times, nobody has experienced anything like this. So a lot of us are sort of adjusting and being nimble as we work through. Now, Michael, I know you have spent and you continue to spend a lot of time in the tech world. What do you think? What new disruptors would come out? What new technologies we can anticipate as a result of this?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, actually. It's no secret that tough times like this calls forth, obviously, the pain and the concern and the difficulty for companies, but it also provides ground for innovators and for companies that find a new way to create solutions that benefit people and industries and customers. Again, no secret that out of 2008, 2009, companies like Uber, Venmo, and WhatsApp were formed and created to deal with specifically solutions they could provide in that circumstance that helped move companies and consumers ahead. So I think you're seeing some interesting work being done right now. A company called Cloudbeds, which we're advising, which has used its platform. It's a PMS provider and is using its platform to connect hotels with available beds with healthcare providers and municipalities in need of those beds at this point due to the intense pressure on the healthcare system. A great use of a technology to connect those in need with those who have inventory. And in fact, there's some discussion of HLA is doing a similar program, as are other companies around the world. And there's some discussion of creating a system whereby, in emergency circumstances, a directory or a technology platform that connects hotels with cities, municipalities, and healthcare providers might be something that continues on into the future and even have its own business model for success going forward. Another company called Alice, which is involved in operations technology, has created a platform which embodies a checklist of housekeeping and back of the house operational efficiency measures, which it's providing free to hotels, which may become built into its platform in the future and help hoteliers do their work more efficiently going forward. Another company we're involved with out in Silicon Valley called Dishcraft Robotics has created a robotic arm which cleans dishes and provides an efficient way for hotels to do back of the house dish cleaning. Obviously, not relevant at this moment because nobody's serving meals. But what they've done is adapted their service to a pickup service, much the way that that linens are picked up and cleaned for hotels and delivered back to them. They can now pick up dishes, clean them using their robotics technology, and then deliver them back to the hotel. Again, preparing the ground for when things come back, for when the industry is robust and guests are visiting us again. A ton of opportunity for hotel companies and technology platforms to create new solutions for the future.
Well, thank you for that. And there are great many stories from hotels, as you talked about, extending rooms to the healthcare professionals, to restaurants delivering meals. There are a lot of stories, particularly for hotels that are contemplating or that might have extended their inventory to healthcare professionals. That yet again introduces a new challenge because the spread is a big issue. We have been in, as we talked about earlier, we've been in bringing people together and dealing with this pandemic and making sure that our associates are safe and the other people that would be in the hotel are safe. That has to be talked about. I know in UK, the healthcare system at one point had sent out guidelines to hotels as to what to look out for and the do's and don'ts of dealing with this. But that was, even though it seems like it was years ago, it was only a few weeks ago, but the world has changed completely and the hotels are not operating anymore. So it is communication and delivering these things thoughtfully is critical. Same question that we talked about earlier from a communication practitioner. What do you think industry can do to gain the confidence? Because I think that's going to be very, very, very important.
Yeah, listen, I think that on the whole, I think hotel companies are doing an outstanding job, by and large, of communicating effectively in a very difficult time. Anybody, and I'm sure everybody by this point, has seen Arne Sorensen's message, which he sent out a couple of weeks ago. I think it was brilliantly done in terms of its candor, authenticity, and offering both a realistic assessment of the current situation, but also looking ahead to the future with hope and communicating resilience. I think that the key, Abid, really is, as I said before, authenticity. We've got technologies, we've got communications vehicles for reaching all our audiences instantaneously and interactively at this point. The key is focusing on the message and the authenticity of what you want to say. It's what your company is about. As Alex brilliantly said, we're about bringing people together as an industry. Each and every hospitality purveyor is about that fundamental mission. And I think tapping into one's own individual piece in that constellation is critical. Taking a few minutes to really think through what your company is, what the value is that you deliver to your associates, your investors, your guests, and then framing that in a way that speaks authentically and truly to your mission is the key going forward.
You know, one other thing that is different today than any other epidemic that we dealt with, whether it was SARS, MERS, H1N1, or anything else we dealt with, this is the first time social media is the consumption of social media is huge. You talked about earlier, there is all sorts of information available, some that might or might not be true, and there is just, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming to sort of stay focused on what you need to do. So much so that depression amongst normal individuals, people like all of us, listening to the news because we're on 24/7 news cycle. All you're hearing about these days through social media, through news networks is all the pain and suffering that is going on. Any thoughts on how to deal with that through the use of technologies?
Yeah, look, I think in general, we live in a society, but more so now under this crisis than ever, we live in a world of clutter. As you say, social media, the volume of noise coming out of every quarter is just, I'm sure you and your listeners and the others on the panel experience this too. There comes a moment where you've just got to switch it off, right? And recoil and redouble into your own situation, take stock and think through what you really feel and how you're really thinking about and positioning yourself for the future. So I would be really leery of in any way adding to that clutter. If you as a company, a hotel, a practitioner are not clear on what you want to say, wait a day or two. Think about it. Say it tomorrow. Say it next week. All the channels will be there. On the other hand, if you've got a contribution to make, a positive contribution, like the fellow at Gravity, like Cloud Beds and HMLA bringing together available beds with those in need, seek out your authentic voice. Think carefully about how you're going to articulate it, and then send it through the right and appropriate channels. It's true in general as a communication strategy, and we always advise our clients, but more so now than ever, authenticity speaks for itself.
Superb.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. So we're approaching the end of it, and I'll come back to all three of you, and we'll open it up. If you would take a minute to think about a feel-good story. We've talked about the pain and suffering that is going on. So we'll give you a minute to think about. Let me turn it over to Sam for a quick second, and then we'll come back starting with Dr. Tucker. Sam.
Well, Michael, I really liked the way your approach is, how with this clutter is so important that do not bombard the channels with lots of messages. Take your time, sit back and use your voice smartly, and also to listen carefully what is being said online about you and about their current situation, and then be compassionate about it. If you would choose any particular channels, are you looking at is the video one of the channels that can reach people easier? They will, or is it something that you put together a episode on, maybe on a podcast where people will just take their time to listen to it when they are ready for it? Or what is your feeling about this?
Well, without a doubt, Sam, I mean, I think, obviously in media, there's been a huge move in over the past decade and more in the direction of video and interactive communication. Listen, when my first PR assignment I'm gonna say it haltingly, the late 1980s involved writing a press release. We typed it on a typewriter. We stuffed the press releases in envelopes, wrote the names of the media who were the recipients of the press release on the outside of the envelopes, and then ran them through postage machines in order to mail out the press release. So far have we come from those days to where we are right now. I would say that the choice of your channel and your vehicle needs to be driven by the immediacy of your message, by what you want to say, and by who your audience is. Channels such as this and other industry publications, almost every industry publication is printing in print, printing online, and doing video. So my suggestion would be kind of review your options, correlate with your message, and hopefully the right channel reveals itself.
Michael, you must have started in this vertical when you were in middle school.
It was caveman. with caveman days.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for that. Let me turn back to Dr. Tucker. Dr. Tucker, to end the session, would you share some story that is positive and that helps us get through this pandemic?
Well, I mean, I think that, and kind of listening to everyone, I think there's kind of three things that sort of really pop up at the end. When I'm thinking about a feel good, because there's so many great things that are going on right now. Our industry is really coming together in a collaborative nature. There is no separation of, I'm in a hotel and, you're in a restaurant and you're a caterer. One of the best stories I can think about is an organization in the DC metro, DC, Maryland, Virginia area, which we commonly refer to as the DMV. Black Restaurant Week, who has put together kind of caterers and restaurants together to serve each other. They put together this great basically kind of takeout event with a coffee shop, Culture Coffee 2 in DC. They partnered them with a caterer, Chef Reese, and people were able to, go in and grab, some great healthy meals as well as a beverage, and just continuing that with the community. I think that that's probably one of the better models of where like the caterer now is becoming like almost the savior. And that particular caterer ended up booking business with first responders, with police stations, et cetera. So they're using creativity and what they do naturally in order to continue their business. But the first responder community and the essential job community is very large. There's still a lot of people working. So the caterer actually becoming that vehicle to be able to really help first responders and feed them and all those avenues, I think is a great feel-good avenue for both creativity as well as the ability to still find an opening and a gap to generate revenue. I think seeing great stories about hotels, I think Alex really talked about, there's that element of the owner to protect the asset, but there's owners that are making decisions to open up their hotels to first responders. To be able to tell that story after it's over is really allowing the customer to make that decision of where they're going to spend their dollars. And I think that's huge in this avenue. The consumer's looking towards the hospitality industry now for what we're doing. What's our next move? That has never happened before. We were kind of tucked behind. I mean, we all have a conversation about it, but we're tucked behind in that discussion. And now seeing that ownership and management is really stepping up to help in this avenue, I think is so huge. A feel good avenue and area. And just for students, I mean, just word to the wise. I mean, tough times don't last, but tough people do. Using your social media platforms for excellent, relevant content, not just what you're feeling, makes a huge avenue and area. And there's now individuals and companies that are seeking out for some great solutions and thought. So use that time for that.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'll have to remember that. Very well said. Tough times do not last, tough people do. And that is very, very eloquently said. Thank you very much for that. We would encourage our listeners and people that have participated in our group of hospitality talks to share other stories where the industry is helping. I know it's innate in our DNA as humanity to help each other. Sometimes, quite candidly, we don't know how. We look to others. So if there are stories that you can share, please go to our group page. Please share some of the stories that are being practiced, because it is very important at this time that we all stay positive and we all stay focused. Thank you, Erin. Let me turn it over to Alex.
Abid, two things come to mind. One is just the simplicity of the written word or text or phone call to connect with people. My United app has never been so empty. My calendar has never been more flexible than I can remember, albeit with a lot of things going on. I've got more time each morning, and I'm really trying to practice each morning, thinking about and praying for people that come to mind. And it isn't a list, it's just who comes to mind. And, one of our general managers sent me an email the other day of, the gravity of the decisions that we're making and how tough it must be as a leader. wishing that he could do something. And I wrote him back and I said, you just did something. You wrote me a letter that made me feel good about and not alone. And those written words are valuable. I sent a letter to a very senior executive for Carnival Cruise Lines, who's just a friend. And as you can imagine, the cruise industry is also getting absolutely hammered by this crisis, if not worse, with some of the unfortunate realities of sicknesses on ships throughout the world. And he wrote me back within 2 hours, just thankful for the note, thankful for friends thinking about him. So the written word is incredibly valuable, or the text or the phone call, to just give people comfort. And then we are in the process right now of putting together a promotion relative to frontline first responders for respite. We haven't come up with a name or the exact program yet, because we're probably some time away from being able to offer it, because we won't be back in business for some time. But when this does calm down and there's an opportunity for healthcare workers and first responders to get some time of respite, which they desperately need, we know our industry is going to be on this. We know that there's broader initiatives that the American Hotel and Lodging Association is working on in this effort. But we want to be a place to welcome those folks with a great special opportunity to just give them some time to rest and relax and enjoy.
Superb. These folks are absolutely doing everything to look after all of us. They are in the front line, so I'm sure that'll be greatly appreciated and needed by the time we get on the other side of this pandemic. So thank you for that, Alex. Last but certainly not least, Michael, any thoughts on something good that is being done and being practiced?
Yeah, two quick thoughts. I think also one on a sort of macro level. I just read this morning that Germany, which is being hit not as hard by coronavirus as some of its neighbors, is opening its beds, hospital beds, and ICUs to patients from Italy and France, where they're being completely overrun and stressed. And it really. Being a little bit of a student of history, you think about the history of Europe and World War II and World War I and sort of lifelong mortal enemies, trading borders and conflict over the course of centuries. And here we have, two countries, part of a common union, one opening its borders and opening its hearts and its hospitals to take in overflow from another. I think that's a really beautiful thing, and well done, Germany, on a macro level. Closer to home, I live right now with my family in the town that I grew up in years and years ago. There's a little inn called The Barn, which serves classic American comfort food fare. This restaurant has been in business for over 100 years, and it looks just like that, kind of an old classic barn in which you sit and have a beer and a burger. It's in great danger of going out of business now as a family-run business. But I learned last night that they have decided to use whatever resources they have to offer free food to an elder care facility right around the block. And so they're taking whatever inventory they have and whatever staff time they can muster to put together meals and deliver them to the senior facility, make sure that seniors and the providers there are well fed and feel a little bit a part of our traditional community here. So to me, that's hospitality doing what hospitality is supposed to do, reaching out, engaging, involving people, and giving back. So shout out to The Barn. Good luck.
Superb. Those are great stories and a great way to end our session. Before I turn it over to Sam, just to reiterate, and everybody knows this, sometimes we just have to be reminded, we will persevere. Humanity is it is going to get through this thing, even though it's a lot of tough times and a lot of people are dealing with suffering and pain. But we will get through it. We just need to stay strong, stay focused, and do whatever we can to help each other. We might not be able to help everybody, but everybody can help somebody. So thank you to three of you, and thank you to our viewers. Let me turn it over to Sam for closing words.
Well, I will really appreciate everything that has been said today. I think people who are viewing around the world, they've been just seem to be just absorbing everything that is being said. I don't see any comments. They just want to absorb and think about it. And I'm sure any comments or feedback that we'll be getting will be channel them to you after the broadcast. But I'm also wary about that, how people are feeling at the moment, and I think how you eloquently just said about that side of humanity, and that we all in it together. And we will look back one day that what are the big lessons we learned from this tragic time, and then we'll become hopefully our hearts are more softer for other people who are unfortunate in this time, and also the teams who are coming back to the hotels and restaurants will be motivated, and they have seen their boss in a new light that they didn't know perhaps before, or maybe they did. So I think it's all good that it's going to happen now, and I'm very positive about that. So with these closing comments, I will then thank you very much for joining the Hospitality Talks, and we will then distribute this recorded into the different channels for people to view at their leisure.